Are you ready? Ready to bring a revolution to your relationships? Ready for the experiences on your dating adventure to evolve? Ready for more passion, intimacy, connection, and love in your relationship? Ready to heal past relationship wounds? You're in the right place. I'm Alan, the love engineer, and this is the Relationship Revolutions podcast. In this series, you'll get guidance and tips from me, interviews from other relationship experts, insights from couples who already have a great relationship, and other mind-opening conversations. Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of Relationship Revolutions, where this week I am joined by my guest, Gail Evans. So, first two questions, Gail. How are you and where are you?
I'm really good, thanks. I'm looking forward to this conversation. And I'm in London, although obviously I have an accent. So I'm originally from Glasgow. My accent is softened a little bit for those of you who maybe don't normally understand the Scottish accent. Yeah, so I'm in London. I've been here for the past couple of years.
Excellent. So, I know one of the things you do is inner child wounds, and
Yeah.
if my memory serves me correctly, which it may not do, you've also done quite a bit around shadow work.
Yeah. I kind of see that the inner child and the shadow are essentially linked. We could almost call them the same thing. It's just that if we look at the inner child, then more often than not, we develop more compassion. Often when we talk about shadow work, people start getting scared of what they might find. But to me, it's almost like, the shadow work that we're scared of is literally the inner child who is in the bed looking at the cupboard door saying, oh, I don't want to look, oh, there's a monster, and wanting its mom and dad. And essentially it's us that need to come and help the inner child look inside of that cupboard and look at all the things that, we've packed away inside of there and determine, the good pieces, the bits and pieces that we want to have, and maybe some of the crap that needs to be cleared up, basically. So, yeah.
Excellent. So, I'm guessing it's not the kind of thing that you go into straight from the careers office in high school, finish school. I'm going to be a coach on inner child and shadow work and all that kind of thing. So, what's the life adventure or journey to get to the point where you are today?
That's a good question. You're absolutely right. This is not something that people often think of as a career path. And I certainly didn't. I was a person who was really into music. I was very artistic and creative. I studied music and eventually I went on tour with a band that I loved and had amazing experiences doing that. But then when I had my daughter, she had lots of allergies. And essentially, that took me on a journey of learning about healing. And I ended up meeting some amazing people who told me that this was just the start of my journey. And I didn't really understand what they meant. Now I do. But at that time, I really didn't. And so I went on a raw food journey. And this led me to meditation and other practices and other people like Michael Beckwith and Abraham Hicks and that kind of thing. And out of that, I became a detox coach. So I learned about healing the body through food because my daughter had lots of allergies, terrible skin, couldn't eat a lot of different things. And not to make it too long, because I don't want to, my life story is quite complicated, I think. But essentially, the detoxing helped connect me to parts of myself and other people that I helped with this in ways that, I couldn't really believe on some level. Like, it helped to release emotions. It helped me to stay more balanced and more centered. I wasn't so in my head. Most of us are walking about as talking heads, disconnected from the body. So I was way more connected to my body. And I started helping people on retreats through juicing, through, raw foods and different health, modalities. And this actually brought me to the place of emotion and recognizing that emotions were trapped in the body. And then kind of inadvertently, I started to be able to see, everyone's kind of wounds in their inner child speaking. And it was almost as if the inner child would start talking to me. I could see their story, I could see their wounds, and often the things that they couldn't see. And so I don't even want to say I embarked on this journey. I think the journey came to me. I think life called me to it. I think it suddenly was just there, and it was almost like the universe saying, this is yours for the taking if you will take up this mantle and help to heal people in this way. It was kind of just there. Obviously, the journey brought me to that. Without all of that, I probably wouldn't have gotten to that. But now it's like something that's just there for me, essentially.
Interesting how our lives change when we become parents.
Absolutely.
We expect some changes, like a bit less sleep, maybe a bit less time to do what I want to do. But then they bring so many other things with them. And it does kick you onto that journey for so many of us, but possibly not enough of us, I would say.
Yeah, I think that I heard a saying years ago that, when you have a child, it will change you. And then I witnessed some people having children and they didn't seem any different, And then there were some people who were very different. A good friend of mine who said she would never have children became very different. She was much more nurturing, and I think it just depends on the person. I think for me,
Yeah.
I've always been open to my child being a teacher. And I think if you look at it from that point of view, then you're more open to what your child is giving you as a gift in this lifetime. I think often the old mentality is you have children and you have to kind of dictate to them how they're supposed to be. And there's nothing to learn from your children. It's you teaching them,
Yeah, I always remember this one day where I had my kids over for the weekend, and my son got upset over something. To this day, I still don't know what it was. And I was doing the typical dad thing, the typical man thing, and to a point, the typical parent thing, where I want to take away this pain from my child or whatever it is, and make him quiet and down and say, "Look, what's wrong? What's wrong?" Really trying to push it out of him. And then he looked me clean in the eye and says, "Leave me alone." I'm like, whoa. That's like, what's going on here? Right. And that moment sort of got me to a place where I didn't just see my perception of who's in front of me, but to really see that child or that person in front of me and find out what's going on for them. I says, well, Absolutely. Okay, well, will you tell me when you're ready? Yeah? Okay, cool. And then from then on, I sort of thought, okay, maybe he's a bit like me, where he needs time to process stuff before he can actually put it into words.
Yeah, I would totally agree, because often our own children, if you're lucky enough to be a parent, can reflect our own inner child. So it's almost like,
yes.
You'll have heard some people probably talking about this, about intimacy, right? That often inside of intimate relationships, maybe you haven't heard this, but this is my take on it. Often inside of an intimate relationship, your partner is going to reflect aspects of your inner child or the parts of you that you've abandoned. And it absolutely is the same with our children, It's actually great that your son was able to vocalize, because some children might be too scared to do that.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that you gave him the space and realized that that's probably what he needed, because you're like that. That's great.
Yeah, it was a great lesson to learn, although probably a painful one at the time, especially for my ego.
Well, that's the thing. Your children, are a great catalyst for looking at your ego. I think most parents haven't, unfortunately, done work on themselves. I certainly hadn't. I would say a spiritual person to a degree, but I kind of there was a lot of judgment around me being the kind of hippie in my family. So I think I kind of judged that part of myself and didn't really embrace it. And then when my daughter appeared, my path was definitely to then go down this kind of, totally different kind of path to most people in the 3D. Like to choose things that other people wouldn't choose, like going on raw foods to help heal her skin. Like no one was doing that then. Like it was not normal to have a green juice. It's not normal to be using coconut oil or chia seeds or anything like that. It was not normal. And I got a lot of backlash for that. But essentially, she helped pull me onto that path, to bring me more towards myself. And my ego was meeting, walls left, right, and center of places that it didn't want me to go. So I hear
Yeah.
what you're saying. It's definitely, parenting is definitely a good shadow work if you choose it to be that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the shadow or the inner child really is just those parts of ourselves that we were led to believe or given the impression that they're not lovable. So we try and
Yes.
push those bits to the side, hide it, bury it, squash it down, do whatever we can, because as a child we just want to be loved. And we don't want to be abandoned. And then
Absolutely.
as we get older, all these things that we've pushed to the side, we don't love them because our parents didn't love them, or our teachers didn't love them, or our friends didn't love them. Yet we want to be accepted and embraced and loved unconditionally
Right.
by our partner.
Right. You see the
Yet
massive
if we can't
problem we
love
have.
those parts of us, how can they?
Right. And the thing is, the fact is that it's exactly what you're saying. We don't love those parts. Excuse me. We don't love them. We don't often realize that those parts are worthy. So often what I'll say to a client when they come to work with me is, your inner child has to be allowed into the room. So I mean all of the parts of that, right? All the things that you judge, as well as all the play, because often when we meet a person's inner child, the inner child actually wants to play. It wants to connect through art or dance or music or horse riding or skating or something, right? It wants to do something that's connecting, you know? However, we also need to allow the other parts, the wounds, the parts of you that you may be judged, but actually are part of your brilliance. We need to allow that in. And most people, unfortunately, are still kind of in their head and judging parts of self, But I kind of look at it like that's what life is about. We sort of come here, we forget who we are because everything's amazing wherever we come from. It's all love. We come into the 3D, onto this planet, and then we have to learn all the ways of unlove that we have kind of attached ourselves to. But you hit on an important point that it isn't just about wanting to be loved. A lot of our fear is about not belonging. It's about not being safe
Yeah.
and not fitting in, And the irony is actually the people that I work with often are the people who aren't supposed to fit in. They're supposed to be the catalysts for their family line and for the next generation. So if you're a person who thinks, oh, that's me, I don't fit in, you're actually not supposed to fit in completely with your family. You're supposed to find your tribe, but you have to embrace your inner child as the foundation of that. Without that, then you're always going to be battling with yourself.
Funny you should say this. I grew up and in school I didn't fit in. In the workplace I didn't really fit in.
Right.
In the family, a lot of the time I didn't feel like I fitted in anywhere.
Right.
Then you meet
Same.
somebody that says, oh, you're born to stand out. Really? I hate standing out.
The thing is that I totally agree. I mean, I was the same, really, I can look at my family and I can see aspects of myself that fit. Like we all have a kind of typically Glaswegian sarcastic sense of humor, right? We like to laugh. But there were definitely aspects of me that, don't fit in. I am kind of a person who asked too many questions, who wanted to explore the arts. Like I said, I want to study music. And I kind of would keep myself to myself a lot because I was like an overthinker, I used to dance a lot. I would be in my own little bubble, in my own little world. And I never really felt like I could connect fully to them. Like I wasn't ever really fully understood. And this then led me to a life of basically meeting that over and over again, constantly trying to find where do I fit. It still happens sometimes. But the difference is that I can look at parts of my life and I can say, oh, I was at the junction of change, at a choice point, right? Really on every part of my story. I went vegetarian when I was 14. My mum thought I was absolutely crazy, but I knew inside that that was supposed to be part of my path, you know? And there's loads of other things. Even when I wanted to do music, it was the same thing. It was like, oh, you shouldn't do that. You won't be able to do it. You're not confident enough. But yeah, there was something inside of me that said, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to follow that. The same with healing my daughter's skin. I spent 2 years kind of outcast from normal society, let's say, being a complete oddball. Whereas 5 years after that, it was totally normal to be having your green juice in the morning, right? So I think people like us, we are always going to have that little piece that says, can I not just rest? Can I not just be accepted? Right? But we have to be aware that our path in this lifetime is to say yes to that for our own self, because it's our inner child that's asking that. And then to find the people who do accept you for who you are and who actually adore and love who you are, instead of trying to fit in normal surroundings where you're just not supposed to fit. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of the desire to fit in goes back to the days where we lived in caves and where rejection or abandonment from the tribe meant death.
Yes. I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree.
But we still have the same programming in that reptilian brain where we go to when we feel unsafe.
Right. But even if you were to look at the tribes, right, there's always going to be a shaman, right?
Yeah.
And there's always going to have to be a leader. And the leader is always going to have to ask the tribe to do something that they don't want to do sometimes. Because all of us would rather stay in the confines of the safe community and also even our ego in our box, right? We want to stay in it because we want to live peacefully. We want to be happy. Everybody wants to have love. We want that. But life is actually always asking us to grow and expand. So even in the tribe, there's going to be a leader who has to say, at some point, our tribe has grown to this point. Now we actually have to move to the next level. And I kind of see it like people like us who are doing, these kind of modalities, this kind of work. We are asking people to stretch themselves. And sometimes that means that sometimes people aren't going to like us much, right? Not that maybe don't like us as a person, but it's only because we are asking them to stretch, And then the shaman in the community, they're going to be the oddball, the healer, right? The person who everybody wants to go to get some healing, but they're that little bit different and quirky. You're maybe not going to, totally fit into the community. But I do hear what you're saying. I believe that every single person's inner child, particularly the wounded self, wants to belong, wants to be seen, wants to be loved unconditionally. And I would add to that the mistake that our own inner children are making is that we're looking for mom and dad somewhere outside in the world. Now, I'm not saying that you don't ever find people like that, especially with your partner. Like, they should be somebody, not that you want them to mother you all the time, right, or father you all the time, but you want someone that can help you heal those parts of self, right? But the first person that has to do that is you. If you don't have an inner parent that talks to you in a loving way, that tells you, it's okay to be who you are. Like, you're supposed to be this way. It's great that you are X, Y, and Z, right? You're lovable exactly as you are. Then it won't even matter what people say outside of you, because you won't believe it.
Yeah. And I think with the inner child, because with it being that part being fragmented or pushed away in our very early years, when we come to try and reconnect or rebuild that connection when we're older, it's like trying to go back to that stroppy teen that doesn't feel seen or heard, and
Right.
says, "Hey, let's make friends." They say, "Screw you, you've neglected me for so long. What makes you think I'm going to believe that you really want to connect and love me now?"
Yes. My ethos around this, maybe I'll explain that, because you've kind of highlighted something perfectly. So how I see it is that we have our wounded inner child, right? Behind that is actually our wonder child. So our wonder child is the you that you came into this world to be, all of your potential, all of your glory, all of your talents and gifts, right? Everything before you were conditioned away from that, right? All of the wonder. Like, if you imagine the child that comes into the world and, is like looking at the sunset, looking at the rain, looking at the snow, looking at animals, and being completely in wonder about all of it,
Yeah.
right? And then we have the inner child, which is what we're really talking about, the wounded self, which is, oh, now I need to conform to the establishment, now I need to be this kind of person. I need to be quiet, or I need to be, more forthright. Otherwise, I don't fit in this dynamic, this family, and I'll be ostracized. That fear that you were clearly talking about, right? Then we have our ego. Now, ego gets a bad rap, especially in spiritual community, especially when we talk about shadow work, right? Ego gets such a bad rap. Now, I'm not of the belief that ego is the problem. I think it becomes a problem, or maybe even the problem for many people. But I don't think it starts out as the main problem. I believe you need your ego in order to strive forward in life, right? So for any of you who are the shaman or the leader, right, in your community, you actually need that. You need that to drive forward, even in the face of great pain, right? Or, people holding you back or not believing in you, anything like that. We need that. However, for most of us, because our inner child becomes wounded, our ego starts to believe that the job that it has to do is to protect that wound, is to protect the inner child. And how you described that piece was absolutely perfect, because I often say your ego is a teenager, and it's kind of a neurotic teenager that believes it knows everything. That point when you get to be a teen, or your children become teens, and they're like, well, I know that. Like, you can't tell them anything. Our ego has kind of become like that. So not only do we have a wounded inner child, with parts of ourselves that we haven't fully met, that haven't been fully met and loved by others, we also have this ego that hasn't fully matured, right? It's basically stopped at a set point and believes that the job is to protect the wound, is to protect the inner child. So whenever you're triggered, and you can see this mostly in intimate relationships, but also, as you said, clearly with your children, right, which is so true, then as soon as your inner child is triggered, like, oh, I'm scared of that, or oh, they don't love me, oh, I don't belong, your teenage ego is going to get up and go, get away from him or her, right? Or they, get away from them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because it
It's
feels
exactly
that
what you said.
pain and connects it with
Right,
their face.
right. Absolutely. And instead of being able to see that it's your filter that's now causing this projection, and it's not always, by the way, because ego can play outside of you. I've been very good at manifesting, let's say, men in intimate relationships who are everything that I could be frightened of, that my inner child would say, that's terrifying, that's scary. don't see it straight away, but then when I'm further into it, I'm like, oh, I've done it again. Because a lot of this is subconscious, right? And it
Yeah.
also can happen anywhere. It can happen in jobs. It can happen with your children. I've worked with clients who are like, they've projected that thing onto their children, and their children are almost mirroring the pain that they have, right? So it can play inside of you and outside of you, which that might be too far for some people to get, but for ease, it's like your ego has a flavor, and so does your inner child. And often when we start working with it, we can hear it, so the inner child will often come across like, let's say, most often the thing that I hear is the voice rises up and the words become very simple. With the ego, the whole energy of it is defense, sometimes attack, but mostly defensive, right? And it's just doing its job. It believes it's your protector. It doesn't realize it's your jailer often. And the only thing that we need to do really is to meet the inner child and to learn to self-parent, because then your ego can have a holiday. It can go wherever it wants, and have a rest.
Yeah. I think one of the analogies I use for talking about ego with my clients is the Incredible Hulk, because it's very angry, it's big, you don't want to mess with it, you don't want to confront it, and then he has this lady interest that calms him down. But the full change in him happens when he starts to love himself.
Right.
Then he can just be sat having a cup of coffee with the other Avengers, talking about anything as the Hulk, and he's as calm as anything. And yet people are asking him for an autograph and whatnot.
That's a great analogy. I actually hadn't thought about the fact that he needs her to calm down, like a mother figure, even though it's like his love,
Yeah.
But like the mother. That's very true.
I think that's what a lot of us do when we're in an intimate relationship. We look to our partner to soothe or take away that inner pain.
Yeah.
Even though this part of us sometimes connects that they've caused it. They haven't. Their behaviour has triggered something from the past.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, there's so much to be said about how the inner child plays out inside of relationships. We could do a whole other podcast on that, basically, because it just will. It's just going to. And I think really what I see from society today is, unfortunately, people are out there looking for relationships and saying, oh, I just want peace, or, it's only the right one when it's all perfect and everybody's laughing all the time. And I constantly feel like switched on towards my partner, all of it. And really, that's not the purpose of relationship. I mean, it absolutely is a part of it. And you can have that connection. But a huge, huge, huge part of intimate relationship is healing.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
Now, I'm not suggesting that, for anyone who's like, oh, I just want to have that peace, I want to have that fun, I want to have that connection, and I don't want to do all of that it's like that all the time, like I have to heal my partner, that I have to mother or father my partner. It shouldn't be like it all the time, but it is a big component, And if you listen to any of the coaches in the relationship world, Harold Hendricks, Gay and Katie Hendricks, John Wineland, like anyone, they all say it's all a part of that. However, it still comes back to, if you know what your wounds are, right? If you know what your inner child needs from you, you can more likely give your inner child that. And also, if you know what your inner child is looking for from another person, hopefully you're more likely to choose that other person more wisely, right? Rather than, what, like me, I've bumped about a lot in relationship. I learned this the hard way, for absolute sure. And I think that's most people.
Me too.
Right. Most of us. And the funny thing is, I think most of the people that are drawn to the healing arts are people who've bumped about and, you know, met lots of parts of themselves through pain. And we want to help other people not do that. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
You know? So,
Now, I
yeah.
think the world of Walt Disney does kind of mislead people into the romantic fairy tale of we live happily ever after when we find the right one.
Right.
But it's not necessarily finding somebody that you can get on with when times are good. It's how you can work together and hold space for each other
Right.
in those almost guaranteed times of disconnection.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. There's a coach that I've actually forgotten his name, but he posted the other day on Instagram about this thing of like your inner child looking for kind of the parent inside of your intimate relationships. And I had kind of said back to him, you know, there is this thing where it isn't just about the people that you attract. You know, I hear that all the time. And I want people to understand that you're actually attracting people all the time. You know, you're attracting lots of different people all the time. So it's not necessarily totally about who you attract. And it's also not totally about who you pick. Although the people that we tend to pick tend to have reflections of our parents, because that's what feels like home. And even if it wasn't loving, they're going to reflect some of that. But a huge, huge, huge piece that I think most people are not looking at is the filter that you have that I've mentioned before, right? Because you could pick somebody who's totally into you, who adores you, who wants a life with you, who wants to connect with you. And if your filter is looking at them like, oh, they're like my mother, that they're like my father, subconsciously, in anything that they do, because your wound hasn't been met, right? Then the chances are that you will play out a dynamic where they start to become more like that because that's what you're projecting. You know, back to ego playing outside of you again. You know, so it's always like come back to yourself first. Do you know yourself? Do you know the parts of you that want you to meet them? Do you know how to respond when you're triggered? Are you able to vocalize that? You know, learning to speak your truth. The throat chakra is a huge part of, you know, spiritual growth that I think often gets missed. Are you able to do that? Then you've got more of a chance of actually seeing the person who's in front of you. You know, it's the
Most of us can't even see ourselves.
Well, well, that's it. That's why, you know, the foundation of all personal growth, spiritual development is find yourself, you know, do the shadow work, go to the places that you are scared to go. And the thing is, when you do that, you don't always have to stay there. You know, I'm not really a believer in like, oh, we have to keep constantly diving into shadow, you know, going into the depths. You do, but you don't always have to stay there. Once you've seen yourself, once you've met your inner child, then you can start to look forward because you're more in alignment. You're not so split, you know? You can come back into alignment. You've met yourself. You know what your inner child needs. Your ego has taken a little break because you're now in the driving seat. And then you can move forward, you know, in life.
Yeah, it's a little bit like going to the dentist, isn't it? It needs to be done. It's not always enjoyable, but when you've done what you need to do there, you can come back and get on with life.
Oh, Alan, I need to go to the dentist and I don't want to go. I think you just like, you tapped into my inner child fear right now. Absolutely. It's like that. It is like that. We are frightened of what may be in there. And I think at the core is that we're afraid that we're actually unlovable.
Yeah.
We're afraid
definitely.
that we don't belong, you know, that we don't fit in, that we're not going to be okay, that we're going to do something and then someone's going to leave, you know, the abandonment wound that actually everybody has. It's just we display it all in different ways, right? Even the avoidant person is, you know, frightened of being abandoned. They'll just abandon first, right? Everybody has the same crap going on. So it's really up to us to try and meet it as best we can. And we're like layers. So we're going to meet one layer, then we'll meet another, then we'll feel great for a while, hopefully a few years, and then we'll have another layer come up. That's what life is designed for, I believe. But absolutely, I like the dentist analogy, although I don't like the dentist.
No, the dentist I had growing up, I liked him as a person. I just didn't like what he did to me.
Right. I think that could be, that little nugget could be used in so many areas of life. That could be used in so many
Like, we love
areas.
our children, we just don't always love the behaviour.
Right. And they love us. They just don't always love our behaviour. You know?
Yeah, they don't like being told
Yeah.
no.
Right. Or they don't like, I think, again, parenting is another subject that could be a whole podcast, but, parenting in itself is like we parent how we believe we're supposed to parent, but everyone has a different version of what that is. Like back in the day, it used to be you let your child cry and they just cry and cry and cry and cry and cry until they go to sleep. More modern times brought in, okay, we actually need to hold our children co-sleeping, all of that kind of thing, because they need connection with us. So we learned something new and we brought that to the table, you know. But often it's like the way we are parenting our children, we can't always be sure that our inner child isn't in the space. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've definitely, times with my daughter, I've caught myself, like almost, when I say like pushing maybe not always a wound, but sometimes my desire for her in life onto her. Like we do that thing where we don't want them to experience the things that hurt us, you know?
Yeah.
I noticed myself
Or
doing
try and
it.
get them to fulfill our dreams.
Right, that thing. It's exactly that. I had a conversation with her one day where I was, let's say, trying to encourage her to kind of think outside of the box. And I can't remember how I worded it, but basically it was along the lines of almost me saying, "Oh, don't go and do that." Like she was talking about working in art and animation. That's what she's studying, and potentially working for companies. Now, I know that her dad, who works for Rockstar, so he designs games, like computer games, had a terrible time with doing lots of overtime and, basically felt trapped by the system. And I'm definitely a person who wants to be away from the system as much as possible. So I was absolutely projecting. And as soon as she said, "Oh, well, I might like to do that," I was like, "Oh, no, like, you should absolutely not do that. You should be like, thinking outside the box. You should, learn different things so that you always have a way of making money by yourself." Right. But that's because my fear is being trapped by the system. Now, she might totally love that. She might love the structure of the 9 to 5. She might even love doing lots of overtime. I don't know. And I only caught it because she kind of rolled her eyes and I could feel that she was getting angry, and I could have kept going with my projection and got upset with her for now being upset with me. However, I caught myself in that moment. I was like, "Oh, that's you. That's me doing that. That's my inner child saying I don't want to be trapped because I don't feel normal and I don't fit in." So we're always doing things like that.
And sometimes we have to do what we want to do, find out that it's actually not what we want to do. And sometimes we have to do what we don't want to do to find out that actually it is what I want to do.
Beautifully said.
Humans are weird.
I think we are. But I also think what you've said is characteristically the design of humanity. I think we're supposed to come and bump against some things, especially early on. And then we've got to figure out how to remove, like I said before, the unlove that's, kind of attached itself to us. that we've kind of embodied and embraced, and instead embody and embrace our authenticity, our natural self, our wonder child, like discover who that is again, But there is absolutely something to be said, in the beautiful way that you put it, which is sometimes we're actually here to meet things that we don't like so we can figure out what we do like. And you often need life experience for that. And parents tend to want to protect their children from all the things that they experienced that they didn't like. But that's not always helpful. And also, I have to remind myself with my clients that this is also true. It's still true for adults. Sometimes they need to meet something that they don't like. And actually, I'm not supposed to save them from that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one of the differences between the way men and women parent is the women will be more nurturing and more loving, and the dad comes from a place of, well, I might warn you once, but if you continue to do that, it's going to hurt you, and then you're going to learn that way.
Right. I would say that I don't know that that's just men and women, or maybe I'm just thinking of masculinized women, because I know some women that are like that. I would say my family was quite matriarchal, and it was my gran ran the family, and my mom kind of was the same. So I can kind of relate to that on some level. But I do have this saying that I like to say, and some of it is a reminder for me, which is we've come from the paradigm of punishment and we're moving into the paradigm of encouragement. Now, that's not to say that you don't create some standards or boundaries for your children. And that's not to say that you don't sometimes have to punish them, right? But the paradigm, the energy around it, especially when you connect to your own inner child, you have more compassion and you have a broader, wider view of your child, right? Like your child isn't just yours. Your child is like, they're on their own journey in the world, It's like the sort of paradigm of, again, the paradigm of punishment. If we think about it, many years ago, smacking your child in the street was an absolute norm. That's just normal. Or belts, right? God forbid, belts and rulers. I've heard some horrible stories from some people, including my dad's, of being hit with a belt or hit with rulers and things like that at school.
Yeah.
So everything was that paradigm, mostly. And then moving forward, we've moved away from that into more encouraging kind of words. Some people might say we've gone too far, right? Because there is that thing of like telling children they can do whatever they want and not having any rules. So we maybe gone too far. I think we're kind of like swinging into more balance where the language is more encouraging and we don't have to punish so much, because that essentially is how we're going to develop respect. Before that, either side of that pendulum, you might think that the paradigm of punishment has more respect, but it doesn't. It just grows more people who want respect, not that give respect, And then the other side, where everyone just does everything that they want and there's no rules and boundaries, well, no one respects anybody either there. So it's finding that balance.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I think the punishment idea is for creating obedience,
right,
rather than respect.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But I think obedience was probably seen as respect at that time.
Yeah.
Without realizing that you're not giving it, And I would say during that time, nobody was connected to their inner child. Like their inner child was like literally locked in the cupboard. Forget being frightened of what's in the cupboard. It was in the cupboards, completely ignored and abandoned.
And some of the kids were as well.
Right, exactly that. So to me, it's like, even when I started doing inner child work, there wasn't really that many people talking about it. There was a few people that had written some books about it, I think in the 90s. I don't know before that, but it wasn't really something that a lot of people talked about. I kind of feel like now there's way more people talking about it because we're having more realization that we have to meet ourselves and that it actually changes the family line, the family system, you know? And I see that with my clients. They start to parent differently because they're now parenting themselves.
Mm. You've mentioned the 3D a couple of times.
Yeah, sorry, my 3D language.
For anyone who may not be familiar with that, what do you mean?
That's a great question. Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that because I do sometimes tend to use language that the normal person wouldn't understand. When I'm talking about the 3D, I'm kind of talking about the way society has been set up, right? So we have children, the children go to school, they learn there, they then, are told to do the thing that they're good at, and that's going to be their job for life. That's not really the norm these days, but that's kind of what the 3D was. It was men going to work, it's the women, raising their children, it's nobody doing any work on themselves, it's men not connecting to their emotions, it's women becoming more masculine and not being able to stay in their feminine. It's the system that's been set up. And so when I talk about the 3D, that's what I mean. I mean, like, I'm trying to think how to be more concise with it. I don't know if that's concise enough. But yeah, essentially, it's the box that society has created and said that this is how life is supposed to be. And then most of the time, if you're in the 3D, you don't question. Most people are not questioning. It's the few. Maybe there's more now, but let's say back in the day when I was growing up, no one's questioning that box.
A bit like watching The Matrix.
Absolutely. It is the matrix. It's the matrix of society. So to me, it's 3D. It looks like real. We've gone from 2D where it looks a bit maybe cartoon. So we're in the 3D. It looks real, but actually it's completely missing 4D and 5D, which is the depth. It's not deep.
Yeah.
It's still kind of shallow. And the depth that I'm talking about outside of 3D is there's a whole realm of you. Let's say we just focus on you as a person. There's a whole realm of you that you don't know. And once you know those parts of you, then there's a whole bigger, more expensive 5D of life that you can experience. It's that for
So
me.
those parts of us that we don't know, I'm guessing they're parts that we don't find just by looking in the mirror or sitting on a mountain in the middle of India going, oh.
That's also a great question, because I have had some people say, well, I just want to go off and be on a mountain and connect to myself. And I do believe, let's say on some level, that's helpful, right? Like, for example, in America, somewhere in America, I can't remember where, but they started doing dark retreats. So you literally go into the dark and you're in the dark for anything up to 4 or 5 days, right? You can pick how long you want. So, so maybe it's not that scary. And you sit with yourself in the dark and people bring you food and they put it through a hatch. So you don't even get to see any light. There's no light through the hatch that they've designed, right? And you see the revelations that people are having after this experience, right? Like when they take off the mask that they've been given to wear as they come out, they look at this view and they cry. And they cry because it's so beautiful. They cry because of the light. They cry because of the connection that they've had with themselves. So there is something to be said for going off and being with yourself. But let's say, on the other hand, that's like an extreme way, right, of sitting with yourself and not being able to go anywhere. And most people don't have the opportunity to do that in the 3D. And if you're on a mountain, you might still be distracted. And maybe more of go into the dark or go and do a plant medicine, right? Although I wouldn't recommend that for everybody. And I don't think that's the be all and end all. But sometimes doing something like that, it forces you into the present moment with yourself. For most of us, that might be simply meditation. It forces you into the present moment with yourself. You're not going anywhere. You're watching all the thoughts that you're thinking and believing. You're just being present with yourself. So it's definitely something in that. However, in order to meet the parts of you, you kind of have to experience them often in real time, right? So what I mean by that is, let's say I'm working with someone and I hear their inner child. Often they don't hear it. They're just being it. They've just become that part of them. They have absolutely no idea. They're not the person that they were 1 minute ago. They're now being somebody else. They think it's just them because it is all of them, but we're many parts of self. And often it takes somebody else to be able to recognize the shift, right? For me, it might be very obvious, but to them, they're so used to it. It's just, it's like they've shifted into their slipstream of consciousness, the consciousness that they're used to. Now they're feeling a little bit victimized. They've become their inner child, and now they're just that. So often it takes somebody else to reflect that and to ask that part of self questions before their kind of soul self, right? Your higher mind is able to witness it and say, oh, wait a minute. What does that remind me of? Oh yeah, that reminds me of when I was 5. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, all right, start to put the jigsaw pieces together, And I kind of like to say it's like until it's brought out of you into this world, until you've actually seen it, written it down, talked about it, these parts of self can just be you. You maybe live your whole life and you never know they're there. There's lots of people that do that. This is why we need community. We need to be working with other people, and we need community. We can't do everything by ourselves, although going and sitting on a mountain by yourself might bring you to parts of yourself, most certainly bring you to God, the universe, to that connection. But that's you going high. Where are you going to go when you need to go deep? Something to think about.
Yeah. You certainly find deep, dark parts of yourself when you marry a narcissist. Not that I would recommend doing that, just to have that experience and meet those parts.
Yeah, I've done a similar journey. Didn't marry him. Thankfully, that might have been a lot worse. And we didn't have children together, which, I know your experience has been difficult. Absolutely. But yeah, I empathize with that journey, because for anybody who has ended up in narcissistic type relationships, abusive relationships, emotionally abusive or physically abusive, it's definitely one of the hardest paths. But one thing I remember asking myself before I got into that relationship was that I wanted to be fast tracked. Maybe you asked me the same, Alan. You just don't remember. Yeah. I asked to be fast tracked, right? And I'm like, okay. The universe says, are you sure, Gail? And I'm like, yeah, I want to be fast tracked. Let me just see all of my crap. Wow. It's a very good way to see your crap.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're born with soulful or spiritual amnesia.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
What do you mean I volunteered for this?
Yeah, do you know?
Why would I do that? That's stupid.
Alan, honestly, I've got an interesting story around that. I went to do a past life regression when I was in that relationship, right? Now, obviously, some of your listeners might say, well, that could just all be made up. And maybe it is, right? However, it really brought to my attention that my part in the choosing of that relationship. I saw him and myself. I don't know where we were from. I kind of felt like we were in Holland, And I was this little girl, and he was my older brother. And we were running away from what seemed to be soldiers, right? Maybe during one of the wars, right? So running away from soldiers. And I throw myself into this water, and he runs away. And in that moment, I was like, oh, he's left me. He left me, right? There's bullets going off. I can hear all of that. But I'm playing dad in the water. I won't tell you the rest of it. It's too long. But essentially, we were asked to replay or to go through that whole experience again and to change it, right? Because this was kind of like the guy who was running this event. It was his idea that we change that memory, like a lot, of therapy will do that. He was like, let's change the memory, and then you'll be free of it. You'll be healed of it. Not everybody else, because I have to be different. Of course, everybody else did exactly what he said. They all went through their experiences. Someone had been a priest who had been killed for beliefs that he had. He went through and changed that whole thing like that didn't happen, right? I experienced the exact same thing, but it was from his perspective. The whole thing, right? Well, it's sad there was more to it. So I could see I was running again, running and running and running. But all of a sudden, my perspective was him realizing that I couldn't run very fast compared to him. So he told me to go in the water and play dad. And he ran on, believing that the soldiers would continue to chase him, right? So he did it to save me, not to abandon me. And what that taught me was, if we're playing out these lives over and over and over again, depending on what you believe, but let's say in this example, we're here to experience life with this soul who keeps coming back into our life, right? To repeat something that we're trying to learn. I then got a whole different view of that person, right? Even though in that life they became another kind of narcissistic person, that there was still good in them, right? That not everything they did was from a horrible, horrible place. Now, you having married a narcissist, that would be very hard to believe. Okay, your inner child was like, no, your ego, like, what? But yeah, I came to the realization that he was the best teacher that I ever had. And that's a hard pill to swallow, right? Like, he was the best teacher of all the ways that I wouldn't love myself, of all the ways that I wouldn't choose myself, of all the ways that I would allow somebody to speak to me and talk to me like shit, of all the ways, can I swear? I just did. Of all the ways.
Go for it.
Of all the ways that I would subjugate myself, I would squash myself, I would deny my power, I would play small, I would become a victim, I would become helpless, I would believe I had no choice. He was the best teacher. It was, it was terrible. And also, the most enlightening shadow work, if I choose it to be that, I want to say that. Because you have to choose it to be that. When I come out of that relationship, and I guess maybe for you, you did similar, I decided very consciously that I wasn't going to continue to keep looking at him. I mean, the painful part of me wanted to keep looking at him and what he did to me, and that he shouldn't be able to do that to other people. I was very much about that, that people should know who he really was. But the majority of me was like, that doesn't actually help me. Like, I need to know why I did it. Why did I choose it?
Yeah, the changing one for me was the relationship after that. Because when that one ended, that totally crushed me. And it was like, okay, things need to change, but how? Then I sort of looked at the whole picture, if you like. So, okay, so this relationship ended. I can't blame the kid's mother for that one. And then looked at the marriage and relationships before that. So, okay, what's the common link here? Oh shit, it's me. But then on the plus side, it's easier to do things and change myself or improve myself than anybody else.
Right. You can't control anyone else.
Yeah. You can try, but it's going to backfire.
Right. That's the thing.
And then you become what you don't want in your life.
Right. Or they start to resent you, and then you repeat the pattern of not belonging and not fitting in. I think I've definitely done that. Let's bring it back to my wounded inner child. So my wound is, a kind of parentified child, like asked to be older before I was probably ready, right? I definitely have what I call proving energy. I think it's much better than it used to be, but it used to be there quite a lot. It was like proving myself, the people pleaser, like molding my personality to fit in with whoever, which can be a great skill, but not at the detriment of your authenticity,
It's a great skill if you're an actor.
Well, that's it. But you don't want to act your way through life, right? The whole point is the wound is saying, I don't belong, I don't fit. And then you're walking about doing that. You're never going to fit and belong, And then on top of that, I've had savior, which is probably why I do the work that I do, because there's flip sides to everything. There's like positives that come out of that. I love helping people. I love it when they have a realization. I love it when they've met a part of themselves and now they're like, oh, that wasn't what I wanted. This is truly who I am. Absolutely love that. I was going to swear again, but absolutely love it.
Right? Go for it. I'll just mark everything as explicit in case I've missed anything anyway.
Okay. So I love that. I love that bit because I really want the world to wake up. I want us to be able to reconnect to ourselves and to one another, right? Feel like very viscerally passionate about that. I can feel it in my system even when I talk about it. However, if I bring that, which I have done, into my intimate relationships, what am I going to be doing? Right? I'm going to be trying to save somebody, even though I don't know I'm doing it, right? I'm going to be trying to lift them up, I'm going to be trying to constantly be seen by that person because maybe they're not even ready to see me. Maybe they're not aware enough because they've not done the work. And I'm busy trying to help them do the work, because then when they finally see themselves, they'll love themselves and then they'll finally love me. Well, that's my pattern with my mom, I would say. Probably more than my dad's, right? That's that old pattern. But it's so interesting to see how much of your personality is born of all of that it's really hard to fully meet it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, because when I reflect on my journey and the relationships I've had, so many of the times I've wanted to be the hero. Because if I hero and be the hero, save them, then I'll be worthy and lovable.
Right, so same thing, just the flip is that I'm a woman.
Yeah.
So I guess for you, it's like knight in shining armor. But maybe you end up like their dads. And for me, it's like, I'm like this savior, this oracle, which I do think I am an oracle, but I shouldn't be an oracle for like saving the person. And then I become their mother, which isn't sexy at all.
Yeah.
And they feel emasculated by that. So it's these things that can play out.
Yeah, because I did my fair share of people pleasing as well, and trying to prove that I'm not the same arsehole as your ex-boyfriend was, and all that kind of stuff. And then you learn about that triangle thing with the hero, the rescuer, and the victim, and and you start off as a hero, and then all of a sudden something changes, and then how am I now the villain, and who the hell is he?
Yeah, but at the moment that you're the villain, you're believing you're the victim. That's the funny thing. I don't think anybody wants to see themselves as the villain. Yeah, there's so much that the inner child and the wounded self, the way it turns up in relationship is unreal. But I do want to also say that, again, part of it is necessary. I do believe that intimate relationships are the call for two people, like you said, before, to come together and to witness the dynamic that goes on. I think the trouble is that often you might be ready for that, but the other person might not be. And in my experience, because I've chosen to, let's say, try and help people, they're automatically not going to be. You know what I mean? Because I'm still working from the wound, let's say, at that point. And I think that's how it is for most people. It's and that in particular, when you were talking about like going off onto the mountaintop, you can go off on the mountaintop or in the dark cave, right? Which actually I do want to do. I think that would be pretty awesome. Scary, but awesome. However, when you come back into...
It sounds like lockdown without the lights, though.
Oh God, lockdown, I hated that. If it was like that, no. But the difference is they're bringing me food that I don't have to make. So I'm quite happy with that. And I get to escape from all of the energy of 3D being a sensitive person. Just have to deal with me. If I can handle that, I'll be okay. However, let's say I go and do that, or anyone goes and does that, or goes off onto the mountain. When you come back to this matrix of real life, whenever you get into a relationship, you're going to have to meet the same stuff anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's different stuff that comes up. It's deeper stuff.
Yeah, it's like that. Was this 21 years ago now, when I went to Australia trying to run away from all of my problems, only to find that they were all still there.
That's a great example. The other side of the world, and yet you're still carrying you.
Yeah, I couldn't get any farther away. I didn't like the other options for ending all of my problems fairly quickly.
Right. Yeah, you can't run from yourself. And also the other thing I would add on top of it is the wounds that we have are mostly relational, right? They're relational because they can. Sorry, Alan.
And they can only be fixed or healed within a relationship.
Right. Yes. Now that could be a relationship with a therapist. Some of it can be healed by that. It could be relationships with friends, or maybe you grew up and you were bullied and you never really had friends. When you find people who are on your wavelength and have fun with them, they're your people, and you can be vulnerable with them and they care about you, that will be very healing. Absolutely. Right? There's aspects of having a child that is absolutely healing. Right? It has been in my experience.
Yeah.
Right? I'm sure yours as well. But then when you get into intimacy...
just don't have the child for the healing.
Oh God, no. Yes, thank you for throwing that in there. Don't have the child for your healing. No. Oh my God. Absolutely not. Unfortunately, I think that's happening quite a lot. Don't do that. But yeah, when you get into intimacy, there's older, or we could say smaller, younger parts of you that are absolutely going to look to be healed in that relationship. We can't help it. It's part of the design. It's just part of it, right? As you said, a lot of healing is relational. We need that space. Now, you might be in a relationship and you have somebody else hold the space between the two of you in order to help heal what is there in each of you. I would recommend that for everybody, because I'm also saying that to myself. I'm never getting in another relationship.
I love doing that kind of thing.
All the time. I'm always like listening to myself. Sometimes it's distracting. But I'm like, I'm never doing another relationship again without having somebody else hold the space, because I can't see all of these parts of me, even with all the work that I've done, and I've done a lot, right? But there's something about relationship that still brings those pieces to the forefront, right? You really get to see like the little nuances of one another that you both don't really know. Parts of yourself that you don't really know, for absolute sure.
Yeah, definitely. And they generally don't come out in the first 3 dates either.
God, no, that's when you're playing, the kind of game of who you would like to be, or who you believe, maybe not always believe yourself to be, but people tend to bring their best self. You know, they're not bringing their wounds automatically at the beginning because the other person hasn't triggered any of them yet. They're bringing their best self. You know, give it a few months or a few weeks.
Yeah, because I've had a few dates in the past where when the ladies found out about what's going on and happened with the kid's mother, they've got triggered and kind of run away. So when I got together with my partner Hannah, I said, oh, by the way, I've got the toxic ex, I've got baggage, I'm broke.
Right.
I live in a van instead of a house by choice, admittedly, but that's where I'm at. And it's like, this is all the bad shit about me. I'm on a journey of growth. It's non-negotiable. Come along for the ride if you want.
Wow.
I thought I'll try and scare her off from the beginning because, let's face it, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen anyway.
Sign on the dotted line. Kind of thing.
Yeah. All those things that you're not supposed to do. So, I just did them.
I think what you said there is a beautiful thing. I had a client say to me, you know, oh, I don't want to say, you know, that I want to get married and I want kids because I don't want to scare them off. I'm like, hon, no. You say that right at the beginning because do you want to get connected to this guy, you know, 6 months later, 9 months later, a year in, you're wondering where it's going. You then have that conversation and you then divulge, probably from an unhealthy place because now you're in pain, that you want children and you want to get married and you feel you're like he doesn't care or whatever's coming out of you. No, you're better to say it right at the beginning and scare that person off right away.
Yeah.
You know, so actually look at these women that ran away when you told them your, you know, baggage. They were supposed to run because the one who is supposed to be with you won't run. Right?
Yeah.
That's how I look at it. So I think you did great.
Absolutely. Well, and on that note, if anyone's listening to this and would like to know more, how can they find you, reach out to you, and get in touch with you?
So you could email me at hi@yoursoulrevealed.com if you want to have a chat about how I can help you with your inner child. Or alternatively, you can find me at Your Soul Revealed on Instagram or Your Soul Revealed on TikTok at the moment. And Facebook, all places.
It's easier when it's the same name,
exactly.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So, final question that I don't prep anyone for, and that is, as this podcast is called Relationship Revolutions, from your perspective, if there was one thing that would bring a revolution or evolution to the world of dating and relationships, what would it be?
Oh, that's a question. I'm loving your questions today. Repeat the question for me. Let me feel it.
If there was one thing that would bring a revolution or evolution to the world of dating and relationships, what would it be? First thing that comes up for you.
Understanding that relationships are the deepest work in order to meet yourself. They're not just for fun. They're not just for building a family. They're not just for traveling with your person. They're all of that, but they're also the deepest work. If you can allow it to be, that will bring you into alignment with yourself. I truly believe that. And
when you do that work, it's also the most rewarding thing you can do in your life.
Absolutely. Thank you for adding that. Absolutely.
Gail, it's been an honour and a pleasure having you on, and I'm sure we'll see you in the online space soon, and who knows, you may even come back.
That would be amazing. Thank you, Alan. Thank you for everything. It's been great.
Thank you for listening. And if you haven't already, please leave me a review on your preferred podcast platform. Click the like button and also subscribe so that you get the new episode notifications. I'm curious, what did you take away from this episode? Please share your takeaways with me. Send me an email to relationship-revolutions@theloveengineer.rocks.